What do you think was the deadliest weapon Europeans brought to the Americas to wipe out entire civilizations? Was it the thunderous muskets? Was it the razor-sharp Toledo steel swords? Or maybe the cannons that smashed through stone walls? You are wrong. The answer is actually far more ridiculous and infinitely smellier than you could ever imagine. The true destroyer, the biological weapon that erased a continent, was a pig. That is right, bacon. Welcome to a roller coaster ride straight into the darkest corners of American history, where we are going to dissect the tumors the textbooks are too afraid to touch. Let's start with the myth of the European knights. We usually picture Spanish conquistadors as invincible war gods, clad in shining armor, riding majestic horses, and terrifying the locals into submission. But the truth is, their guns took forever to reload, and their horses were dying from the tropical climate. The real MVP of this brutal conquest was a herd of squealing livestock. The main character of this tragedy is Hernando de Soto, a man who was essentially a walking disaster of the 16th century. In 1539, de Soto landed in what is now Florida, dreaming of finding his own El Dorado. He brought hundreds of soldiers, attack dogs, war horses, and, most importantly, 13 pigs. Yes, just 13 pigs. His plan was simple. Pigs are a mobile food source. They're easy to breed, they eat anything, and they can walk, so you don't have to carry them. But de Soto didn't realize he had accidentally activated a biological time bomb. Pigs breed at a terrifying rate. From those original 13, within just a few years of wandering the dense forests of the American Southeast, the herd had multiplied into the thousands. The problem wasn't just that they reproduced fast. The problem was that they were like biological tanks, destroying the ecosystem. These pigs weren't kept in pens, they roamed free. They tore up the soil, ate the native crops, and destroyed the corn reserves that tribes had stored for winter. But that wasn't even the worst part. The horror lay inside those pigs' bodies. Pigs and humans have very similar biological structures, making pigs the perfect disease vectors. De Soto's swine carried anthrax, tuberculosis, trichinosis, and countless strains of European flu. For the Spanish, who had lived with livestock for thousands of years in crowded, filthy cities, their immune systems could handle it. But for the indigenous people, who lived in cleaner societies and had never been exposed to large-scale domesticated animals, this was a death sentence. The pigs ran into the forests, infected the deer and wild turkeys, and contaminated the water sources. The locals went hunting, drank from the streams, and boom, the apocalypse began. When de Soto's expedition passed through the Mississippi Valley, they recorded bustling cities and dense populations. But just a few decades later, when other explorers returned, there was nothing but silence and overgrown jungle. No survivors. The pigs had wiped out the entire Mississippian civilization before the Europeans even fired a decent shot. A silent genocide started by a squeal. And this leads us to a broader, darker truth, one often overshadowed by Hollywood movies. That is the myth of the conquest by gunpowder. We watch movies of cowboys and Indians shooting at each other and think Europeans won because of superior technology. Wrong. Europeans won because they were super spreaders. According to the latest research, it is estimated that 90% of the indigenous population of the Americas died within a century of Columbus arriving. 90%. Let that sink in. If the world today has 8 billion people, a similar disaster would wipe out 7.2 billion, leaving only a tiny group clinging to life. This was the greatest apocalyptic event in human history, far exceeding the Black Death in Europe. Diseases like smallpox, measles, and the plague killed native people faster than any army ever could. There is a famous and incredibly cruel story about the British giving smallpox-infected blankets to Native Americans. Many argue whether this is fact or fiction. The answer is it is real, and it is in writing. In 1763, during the siege of Fort Pitt, General Geoffrey Amherst, a so-called polite British gentleman, wrote to his subordinate about how to handle the uprising tribes. He coldly suggested, could it not be contrived to send the smallpox among those disaffected tribes of Indians? And his men did exactly that. They took blankets and handkerchiefs from a smallpox quarantine hospital, wrapped them up like a diplomatic gift, and sent them to the tribal chiefs. The result was a medical catastrophe. But to be fair, this intentional cruelty was just a drop in the ocean. Most deaths happened naturally through casual contact. This destruction was so fast and terrible that when the English pilgrims arrived in New England, they found vast cornfields already cleared and beautiful flatlands completely empty of people, scattered with sun-bleached bones. They naively thanked God for clearing the path for them, thinking it was an empty promised land. But in reality, they were walking on a massive graveyard where the true owners had died in agony just a few years prior. America wasn't built on empty land, it was built on a continental cemetery. So who opened this Pandora's box? Who is the first villain in the dark cinematic universe of American history? None other than Christopher Columbus. If you still think Columbus was a brave explorer or a hero of civilization, I am sorry, but you have been scammed by one of the most successful PR campaigns in history. In reality, Columbus was a greedy dictator, so brutal that even the Spanish government of that time, which was not exactly nice, was horrified and threw him in jail. When Columbus landed on Hispaniola, he met the Taíno people. The Taíno were gentle, friendly, and, unfortunately for them, they wore gold jewelry. Columbus's eyes lit up like car headlights. He immediately established a regime that today we would call a forced labor concentration camp. Columbus imposed an insane tribute system. Every Taíno over the age of 14 had to submit a certain amount of gold dust every 3 months. If they paid up, they got to wear a piece of copper or brass around their neck as a receipt. And if they didn't pay, the punishment wasn't a beating or jail time. The punishment was chopping off their hands, literally. Spanish soldiers would chop off the hands of the Taíno, hang them around the victim's neck, and let them bleed to death or live as cripples as a warning to others. Under the rule of Columbus and his brothers, the island paradise turned into hell on earth. Women were taken as sex slaves for the soldiers. Children were thrown to attack dogs as a form of entertainment. The Taíno were so desperate that they committed mass suicide. Mothers killed their own infants so they wouldn't have to grow up under Spanish torture. Within a few decades, the Taíno population went from hundreds of thousands to zero, extinct. 100%, not a single full-blooded Taíno survived. Columbus's legacy wasn't discovery, it was total annihilation. That is why, today, many places are tearing down his statues, not because they hate history, but because they finally understand the naked truth behind the myth. Wait a second. I see your jaw is on the floor. You are shocked, aren't you? What you just read was merely the warm-up. We have only covered the first 3 facts, and the horror level is still at preschool. In the next sections, I will tell you about cannibalism right here in America, about insane cults and experiments on living human bodies. If you want to keep your brain enlightened by these dark truths, comment the word shocking down below right now so I know you are still sane. And do not forget to smash that subscribe button immediately and turn on the notification bell. If you miss the next video, you will be stuck living in the fairy tale that textbooks have fed you. Do it now. I'm waiting. All right, back to the nightmare. We talked about the Spanish. Now, let's talk about the English. You know, the British usually pride themselves on their noble lineage and civilization, but when the first settlers arrived in Jamestown, Virginia in 1607, that civilization was thrown into the trash bin to make way for animalistic survival instincts. Welcome to The Starving Time, a name that sounds like a reality TV show, but was actually a real-life horror movie. In the winter of 1609, the Jamestown colony was besieged by the Powhatan natives. The Powhatan were sick and tired of these strangers encroaching on their land and demanding food, so they decided to lay siege and stop anyone from leaving to hunt. Inside the Jamestown fort, hell began to take shape. Food ran out. First, they ate the horses, then the dogs, cats, then rats, snakes, and even shoe leather. But the hunger didn't stop, and when hunger overrides reason, humans start looking at each other not as friends, but as meat. Historical records tell terrifying stories you will wish you could unhear. There were people who secretly dug up fresh graves to eat the corpses. There was one man driven insane by starvation who murdered his own pregnant wife while she slept. He chopped her up and salted her flesh to save it for later.
When he was caught, he was executed by burning, but that story haunted Jamestown forever. You think that's just a rumor? In 2012, archaeologists found undeniable proof in a trash pit at Jamestown. It was the skull and shin bone of a young girl about 14 years old, whom they named Jane. Jane's skull was covered in clumsy cut marks, signs of flesh being stripped away with a butcher knife, and the skull had been cracked open to extract the brain. The cuts showed that the person doing it was hesitant, probably because they had never butchered a human before, or because they were shaking with terror and hunger. Jane was eaten by her own people to survive. The American dream didn't start with freedom and democracy. It started with the taste of human flesh in absolute desperation. Speaking of Jamestown, we cannot ignore Pocahontas. Ah, Pocahontas, the beautiful Native American princess who threw her body over the handsome John Smith to save him, and then they had a cross-cultural romance and sang Colors of the Wind at sunset. Thanks, Disney, but please throw that script in the garbage. The truth about Pocahontas is a tragedy of human trafficking, child abuse, and political propaganda. First of all, when John Smith told the story of being saved by Pocahontas, she was only about 10 or 11 years old. There was no romance here, unless John Smith was a predator, but it is more likely he made the story up or misunderstood a tribal adoption ritual. But the later part of Pocahontas' life is where it gets truly dark. She didn't go with the English voluntarily. She was kidnapped. In 1613, the English abducted Pocahontas to hold her for ransom from her father, Chief Powhatan. During her captivity, she was forced to convert to Christianity and renamed Rebecca. Then she married John Rolfe, the tobacco tycoon of the time. Many native historians argue this marriage was essentially forced, a political alliance covered up by a romantic facade to calm tensions. The English then shipped Pocahontas to London as a specimen to put on display. They wanted to brag to the king and investors, "Look, even the savages of the New World can be tamed and become civilized like us." Pocahontas became a living marketing tool, but the pollution and climate of London were a death sentence for her. Her immune system couldn't take it. In 1617, as she was preparing to board a ship back home, she fell ill and died at Gravesend, England, at only about 21 years old. She died in pain, vomiting blood, far from her homeland, used as a puppet by her father's enemies. There was no romantic song, no happily ever after, just a cold grave in a foreign land for a young girl crushed by the wheels of history. We have covered the biological bombs and the early starvation, but you might be thinking, surely once the colonies were established, things got more civilized, right? Wrong. If anything, the madness just became more organized. Let's travel north to Massachusetts, to the infamous town of Salem. When you hear Salem witch trials, you probably imagine a bunch of religious fanatics burning women at the stake because they danced in the woods. While the fanaticism was real, the cause might not have been the devil. It was, likely, bread. Yes, bread again. Food seems to be a recurring villain in this story. There's a leading scientific theory that the bewitchment of the girls in Salem, the fits, the convulsions, the sensation of ants crawling under their skin, and the terrifying hallucinations was actually caused by ergot poisoning. Ergot is a fungus that grows on rye in damp conditions. And guess what the weather was like in Salem in 1692? Extremely swampy and wet. When you eat bread made from ergot-infected rye, you get a condition called convulsive ergotism. Modern science has another name for the chemical derivative of this fungus, LSD. That is right, the entire town of Salem might have been, unknowingly, tripping on a bad batch of psychedelic sourdough. They weren't fighting Satan, they were high as kites on hallucinogenic fungus. But instead of listening to Pink Floyd and chilling out, their Puritan paranoia turned the bad trip into a bloodbath. They hanged 19 people and pressed one man to death with heavy stones just because their breakfast toast was moldy. It's a terrifying reminder that some of history's darkest moments might just be a result of bad food safety standards. Now, let's fast forward to the birth of the United States and meet the ultimate American hero, George Washington, the man on the $1 bill, the father of the nation.
We all know the cute little myth that Washington had wooden teeth because he was so honest and humble. Well, prepare to have your childhood ruined. George Washington did not have wooden teeth. Wood gets soggy and rots in your mouth. Washington needed something durable, something real. So he wore dentures made of gold, lead, hippopotamus ivory, and human teeth. But where did he get those human teeth? He didn't just wait for the tooth fairy. His ledgers and account books from Mount Vernon tell a much grimmer story. There are entries explicitly recording payments to unnamed Negroes for their teeth. Washington, the champion of liberty, was walking around with the teeth of his own slaves inside his mouth. Imagine the horror of that transaction. A slave being forced to sit down, have a healthy tooth yanked out of their jaw with pliers just so their master could smile while signing the Declaration of Independence. That wooden teeth lie was invented to cover up the grotesque reality that the father of the country was literally chewing his food with the stolen body parts of the people he enslaved. It gives a whole new meaning to the phrase, biting your tongue, doesn't it? As the new nation grew, it needed room to expand. This brings us to the relentless march west, often romanticized as manifest destiny. But this expansion required clearing out the current residents. We already talked about pigs and smallpox, but by the 19th century, the U.S. government decided to get more strategic. They realized they couldn't catch every Native American warrior on a horse, so they decided to destroy the Native Americans' supermarket, the American bison. In the early 1800s, there were an estimated 30 to 60 million bison roaming the Great Plains. The herds were so massive that they looked like a moving brown ocean. For the Plains Indians, the bison was life. It was food, clothing, shelter, and tools. To defeat the Indians, the U.S. Army adopted a simple, chilling policy: kill every buffalo you can. Every buffalo dead is an Indian gone. It became a sport. Trains would slow down so passengers could lean out the windows and shoot bison for fun, leaving thousands of carcasses rotting in the sun. They didn't even take the meat. They just took the tongues or the hides and left the rest. In a few short decades, the population dropped from 60 million to less than 500. There is a famous, haunting photo from the 1870s that shows a mountain of bison skulls piled higher than a house, with a man standing proudly on top. That isn't a hunting trophy. It is a monument to a calculated genocide by starvation. They broke the ecological backbone of a continent just to force tribes onto reservations. And once they got them onto reservations, the horror shifted from the body to the mind. This brings us to the residential schools. The motto of these schools, coined by Captain Richard Henry Pratt, was explicit: kill the Indian, save the man. The goal was cultural erasure. Children were forcibly taken from their parents, sometimes at gunpoint, and thrown into boarding schools run by the government and churches. At these schools, their hair, which held spiritual significance, was chopped off. They were beaten if they spoke their native language. Their names were replaced with European numbers or names. But it wasn't just cultural discipline, it was a house of horrors. Physical and sexual abuse was rampant. Disease spread like wildfire in the cramped dormitories. And when these children died from tuberculosis, malnutrition, or suicide, they weren't sent home. They were buried in unmarked graves behind the school. Recent discoveries in Canada and the US have unearthed ground-penetrating radar images showing thousands of anomalies consistent with unmarked graves at these school sites. Thousands of children went to school and never came back. Parents were often told their children had run away, while in reality they were lying in a shallow pit just a few hundred yards from the classroom. This wasn't ancient history. The last residential school in Canada didn't close until 1996. That is in your lifetime. Let's close this section with a story that embodies the sheer madness of the westward expansion: the Donner Party. You have probably heard the name, but the details are what make it a true American nightmare. In 1846, a group of pioneers decided to take a shortcut to California. Spoiler alert, never take the shortcut. They got trapped by an early winter blizzard in the Sierra Nevada mountains. Snowed in, freezing and starving, they ate their cattle. Then they ate their dogs. Then they boiled the ox hides and ate the glue-like paste. But as the weeks turned into months, the taboo was broken.
The survivors began to eat the bodies of those who died. But here is the detail that will keep you up at night. To avoid the psychological trauma of eating their own relatives, they labeled the bodies and swapped them. One family would eat the father of another family, and vice versa. It was a macabre potluck of human flesh. When rescuers finally reached them, they found a scene that looked like a butcher shop, with half-eaten limbs scattered around. It is the ultimate dark irony of the American dream. People were so desperate to reach the land of milk and honey that they ended up feasting on their neighbors. We have survived the biological warfare of the colonial era and the cannibalism of the frontier, but now we enter an era that is perhaps even more terrifying because it looks so civilized. Welcome to the 20th century. This is the age of industry, capitalism, and science. You might think this is where the bloodshed stops, but in reality, the slaughter just became more efficient, incorporated, and profitable. Let's talk about breakfast, specifically the banana sitting on your kitchen counter. You have probably heard the term Banana Republic. Today, it's a clothing store where you buy overpriced khakis, but the origin of that term is soaked in blood. In the early 20th century, a monster was born, the United Fruit Company, now known as Chiquita. This wasn't just a fruit seller, it was a corporate empire that operated like the mafia, but with its own navy and the backing of the US military. Throughout Latin America, in Guatemala, Honduras, Colombia, United Fruit owned everything: the land, the trains, the telegraph lines, and the politicians. They were known as El Pulpo, the octopus, because their tentacles were everywhere. They didn't just want to sell bananas, they wanted to own the countries that grew them. When a democratically elected president in Guatemala, Jacobo Arbenz, decided to give some uncultivated land back to the poor farmers, land that United Fruit wasn't even using, the company didn't file a lawsuit. They picked up the phone and called their friends at the CIA. The CIA launched a full-scale coup in 1954, codenamed Operation PBCLIMB. They bombed the capital, spread fake news about a communist invasion, and installed a brutal military dictator who would protect the company's profits. This plunged Guatemala into a 36-year civil war that killed 200,000 people. All of that death and destruction just so Americans could keep buying bananas for 10 cents a pound. Every time you peel a banana, remember that entire governments were toppled to put it in your hand. Speaking of corporate arrogance, let's talk about the man who put America on wheels, Henry Ford. We know him for the Model T and the assembly line, but have you heard about his failed utopia in the middle of the Amazon rainforest? It was called Fordlandia. In the late 1920s, Ford wanted to break the British monopoly on rubber, so he decided to build his own rubber plantation in Brazil. But Henry Ford didn't just want rubber, he wanted to export the American way of life. He built a town in the middle of the jungle, complete with white picket fences, American-style hamburgers, golf courses, and strict prohibition on alcohol. He forced the indigenous Brazilian workers to live like Midwestern factory workers. He made them wear ID badges, work 9-to-5 schedules under the blistering tropical sun, and, this is not a joke, he forced them to engage in square dancing and poetry readings. He tried to civilize the jungle with square dancing. The result? The jungle fought back. Caterpillars destroyed the rubber trees because Ford planted them too close together, ignoring local advice. The workers revolted in the saucepan riots, chasing the American managers into the river. Fordlandia stands today as a rotting, ghostly monument to the idea that American capitalism can conquer nature. It can't. But while Ford was trying to export American culture, back home, corporations were literally poisoning their own workers. Enter the Radium girls. In the 1920s, radium was the new miracle element. It glowed in the dark, and people thought it was healthy. Companies hired young women to paint watch dials with undark paint, a radium-based mixture, so the watches would glow. To get a fine point on their brushes, the supervisors told the girls to use the lip dip paint technique. The girls would put the radioactive brushes in their mouths to sharpen the tip. They were swallowing nuclear waste all day. The company assured them it was safe, even as the company owners wore lead aprons in the labs. Soon, the girls began to glow, literally. They would wear their best dresses to work, so they would sparkle at dance halls at night. But then, the horror started.
Their teeth began to fall out. Their jaws rotted and crumbled to the touch, a condition literally called radium jaw. One girl's jawbone famously detached from her skull when the dentist tried to pull a tooth. They were disintegrating from the inside out while still alive. When they tried to sue, the company stalled, waiting for them to die so the testimony would be buried with them. The only reason we have labor safety laws today is because these ghost girls fought for justice from their deathbeds, their bones still glowing in their graves to this day. However, corporate greed isn't the only way to destroy a community. Sometimes, pure jealousy and racism are enough. Let's travel to Tulsa, Oklahoma, 1921. There was a district called Greenwood, known as Black Wall Street. It was the wealthiest black community in the United States. They had their own banks, luxury hotels, theaters, and private airplanes. It was proof that African Americans could achieve the American dream if just left alone. But white neighbors didn't like that. They didn't like it at all. Following a minor incident in an elevator, a white mob, deputized by the local police, launched an all-out war on Greenwood. This wasn't a riot, it was a military assault. For the first time on American soil, airplanes were used to drop homemade turpentine firebombs on American citizens. The mob burned 35 blocks to the ground. They murdered hundreds of black residents and dumped their bodies in the river or mass graves. Within 24 hours, Black Wall Street was erased from the map. For decades, the state of Oklahoma tried to cover it up, removing police reports and newspaper articles from the archives. Teachers were forbidden from talking about it. A thriving city was turned into ash, not because of a crime, but because of the crime of being successful and black. But if you think open violence is the worst the government can do,
Wait until you hear about the silent betrayal, the Tuskegee syphilis study. This is arguably the most infamous medical crime in U.S. history. In 1932, the U.S. Public Health Service recruited 600 poor black men in Alabama. They were told they were receiving free health care for bad blood. In reality, 399 of them had syphilis, and the doctors had no intention of curing them. The doctors wanted to observe the natural progression of the disease until death. Here's the kicker. In 1947, penicillin became the standard cure for syphilis. It was cheap, available, and effective. The doctors could have cured these men in a day. Instead, they actively blocked the men from getting treatment. They warned local pharmacies not to give them medicine. They watched as the men went blind, went insane, and died in agony. They watched as the men infected their wives and passed congenital syphilis to their children. This went on for 40 years. It didn't stop until a whistleblower leaked the story to the press in 1972. The government let its own citizens rot for 4 decades just to see what a corpse looks like. And that is where we are going to pause. We have seen how history chewed up the bodies of the innocent through starvation, disease, radiation, and fire. But if you think this is the bottom of the barrel, you are wrong. We haven't even touched the most terrifying part yet, the mind. In part 2 of this series, we are going to dive into the things that will truly keep you awake at night. I'm talking about the Nobel Prize-winning surgery that turned people into vegetables with an ice pick. I'm talking about the CIA's secret project to control your thoughts using LSD. And I'm talking about the time the Pentagon planned to blow up American planes just to start a war. You do not want to miss what comes next. It gets darker, weirder, and much more personal. So, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. Part 2 is coming soon, and trust me, you need to be prepared. Thanks for watching. I'm Infinite Fantastic Facts. See you on the other side.